Welcome to Sometimes There's Side Eye, a podcast about two friends having real and unfiltered conversations about dogs and people. Listen as we talk about our lives with dogs, training, behavior, share some laughs, and a whole lot of banter. I'm Heather.
And I'm Christy.
And today we are going to talk about training.
First, if you've liked our previous episodes and have forgotten to subscribe or share or rate us, feel free to pause the episode and do that now while you're thinking about it and then rejoin us. So, training.
Oh boy.
Wow, training can be a very divisive topic. So, before we even get started, I'm going to put a little caveat on this. It's okay to disagree with us and our opinions. These are our opinions. So, it's okay if you disagree or you agree. But what I would ask is that you just have an open mind. This whole podcast is about us learning and being open-minded to new and different ideas. And so I would ask that people just keep an open mind throughout this potentially messy topic.
Oh, it's going to be messy. I already have big feelings.
Yeah, we both have big feelings about training and really where this podcast kind of started from was our training talks. So yeah, kind of the root of it.
And I would say that this episode is actually not about training per se, but really it's about getting curious, like Christy says, and your relationship with your dog and what you want that to look like. So we are going to start by talking about our individual sort of training histories, just little snips of that. And then we're just going to wade right into the deep water.
I hope you're wading with us.
Hope you can swim.
So before we get into the deep waters, we wanted to define a couple words that we'll be using throughout the podcast. Okay, the first is positive reinforcement. And so in this podcast, when we're referring to that, we're talking about adding a reward to increase a desired behavior. For example, adding treats while training to increase the amount of times your dog sits or lays down on command, those types of things. We also want to define what an aversive is.
So basically, when we're talking about using an aversive with our dog, it is something that the dog doesn't like. So that could be anything from a harness to a prong collar to an e-collar. And we're going to dig into that and I'm going to explain, well, Christy will explain why we're putting a harness on that list. So just bear in mind that when we're talking about aversives, we feel pretty strongly that that is defined by the dog and not by a stringent definition out of a dictionary.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
And a side note, so positive reinforcement is often also referred to R+. So I'm not sure that we'll use that terminology, but if we do, we're talking
we
about
might use it if we get lazy and don't want to say positive reinforcement anymore.
We'll see where this goes.
Like I said, we're going to start with training history. I'm going to give that a whirl. And I'm going to start with my first Rottweiler, Link, who you all know at this point that he is a dog that I got as a puppy in 2003. He was really my first dog that I actually trained as an adult on my own. And he was a really difficult puppy. And he was a really strong-willed dog. And I needed a lot of assistance when it came to dealing with him and some different behavior issues. So we started in a training class when he was fairly young. And I remember going into the class and the trainer slapping a prong collar on him and taking him around the ring in front of all the other people in the class and yanking on him and I use in air quotes, correcting him on this prong collar and then handing the leash back to me. And that was my introduction and training session on how to use a prong collar. So that feels slightly inadequate, but this was what happened. And I used the prong collar on him for a little while. That was also, just a side note, the trainer who told me to euthanize Layla. So clearly didn't stick around there for very long. And I ended up moving to a different training facility. And I had switched over to a gentle leader. Don't remember if I did that on my own or if it was with that trainer, but Link was a very large dog. He was 113 pounds and he was dog reactive. And I found the gentle leader to actually be the right equipment for him. And it gave me a lot of confidence in handling him, a lot more personally than what the prong collar did. I imagine if the prong collar had been more effective for what I was dealing with, I would have stayed with it. But we moved to a gentle leader. And I say that because I, at this point, was not all positive reinforcement, because I also, during the same time, used a citronella collar on him for the dog reactivity, which is absolutely an aversive. So yes, I was using a gentle leader, which technically, if you want to get into the weeds, could also be an aversive. But anyway,
Right. I was just thinking that, like, if that's
yes,
actually technically an aversive as well.
yes, because it's a head color and you're directing their head, and if a dog doesn't like it. But anyway, in our situation, the gentle leader was not an aversive for Link. He felt comfortable wearing it. It was a great tool for us. It allowed me to have access to take him on walks, and I felt safe. And it really did open more doors for us. So I don't think of that as an aversive for him at all. So then moving forward, we got Lucy when Link was around 2 years old. And at that point, I was pretty much transitioned to reward-based training or positive reinforcement primarily with her. I had started foundation agility training. Majority of the stuff that I was doing really was more on what we would call the positive reinforcement side of things. That's pretty much where I stayed. I didn't really do a lot of traditional training with Layla, or I mean, Remy and Daisy both came perfect, so there was nothing to do there. And so
That's nice.
I know. I did do training with Cash. He was a really soft Rottweiler, and I don't mean that in a negative way. He was just really sweet and had a really, really gentle soul. And
Mm.
had I slapped a prong collar on him, man, that would have just crushed our relationship. There's no way I would have done it. So everything I did with him, he loved to learn in our home, and everything I did with him was very reward based, and he was really receptive to that. Moving forward to Tiago, although he is the smallest Rottweiler I've owned, he's probably the strongest. And I walk him on a martingale. It's a no slip style collar. I've walked him on a martingale his whole life. I think I did a short stint with a gentle leader. It was aversive to him. He hated it. I did that because he's so strong. I had somebody when he was an adolescent tell me that, oh, you should put him on a prong collar. And I admit that he went through a stint where he would sort of do this at other dogs. Oh, it just scared Tater. So sorry,
Oh
Tater.
no, poor
No, he
Tater.
was sleeping. He was like, what? Um, so Tiago went through this phase during adolescence, which isn't shocking, where he sort of did this like little bounce thing at some dogs. That happened. And somebody who I know had said, you should put a prong on him. And I got it. I understood that what Tiago had done, although not aggressive, it was rude and it was inappropriate. And if he did it to the wrong dog, holy hell, we could have a problem. And so instead, I took that as, well, shit, I need to get my stuff together. And I really need to make sure that that doesn't happen. The majority of the time, that stuff doesn't happen. Dogs will still be dogs, but he doesn't do that type of behavior at this point. And I did that by just training him using more engagement exercises and that kind of thing. And we've worked towards not having those kind of outbursts, shall we say. So I
Yes.
did not use a prong collar with him. However, I told Christy I still own that prong collar. It's in my training room, which is also my laundry room, in a box somewhere. And
I'm glad that you've moved that so many times as you've moved each house.
seriously,
Like,
seriously, we've moved like 8 times and I've moved the prong collar with me every single time. Yep, still have it.
I haven't used it in years, but still move it with you.
No, but it's interesting that I haven't trashed it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe because it doesn't take up that much space. I
Mm.
can't personally think of a time where I would use one again, but I also am not like, holy shit, I would never ever use one again. There are scenarios, and we're going to talk about that, where I think that prong collars are a safety thing.
Mhm.
So that's kind of my training history. So let's have Christy give a little rundown.
My history, my first dog, Duke, had zero training, couldn't walk on a leash even. I didn't even wear a collar. So he's out. So I would say we did mostly positive training with her, lots of treats, and she lived most of her life walking on a harness. However, she did learn how to get out of any harness. She would contort her body in crazy ways to get herself out of a harness. So I did transition her to a prong collar at one point. I had zero training. No trainer told me to use a prong collar. I just went to Walmart, no PetSmart, and and got one. I didn't even know they unclipped, so I was just like shoving it over her head, like it so bad, like so
Yeah,
bad.
not exactly
Um,
a good fitment.
no, no. And I bought the one for like 120-pound dog instead of my 40-pound dog. Like,
It was
so it
a
was
necklace.
huge.
It was like a necklace.
It was like took up her whole neck. Like,
Oh my God.
so she didn't live a whole lot on that before I transitioned her to a martingale, which worked fine for her. She was only 40 pounds, so that worked well. Although we were just revisiting with the family about, just talking about past dogs. And my family said, "Oh, she was so stubborn." And I was like, why do we say that? Like, what was it about her? And then they reminded me that when she was a puppy, I would flip her over because that's what you did,
Alpha
you
roll.
know, 30 years ago. And then you like kept them there for 1 minute. And anytime they moved, you reset the minute. And I'm telling you, like I would sit on that floor with her for an hour and a half because she didn't give up. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. I said, I would never do that today.
Yeah.
And my whole family was surprised by that. Why not? And I said, oh, our
Oh.
understanding of dog behavior is so different. I said, and now I just look at that as, wow, that dog was so resilient. Like
Mm.
she didn't give up on things. I don't think of her now as stubborn. At the time, I definitely did, but my mind has shifted from stubborn to resilient.
Mm.
Um, which is interesting. Like when I realized talking to them. Nobody else's mind in my family had shifted, but mine had, and I was like, "Oh, because I'm in it.
I
I
was
get
just gonna
this."
say,
Yeah.
well, you're invested in the training
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. And it's such a gradual process. Sometimes you don't even realize what a shift you've had until
Yes.
somebody brings up the past and you're like, "Oh, wow, I used to do that." Woo, okay.
Yeah, you do that to me a lot, by the way.
Okay. Sorry, and you're welcome.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes I'm like, "Oh, shit, she's right." And then sometimes I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's true." It's all good though, because
Okay.
it's good to remember where we came from.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it keeps us humble too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tater keeps me
Um,
humble. I don't need
yeah,
anything else.
go. Perfect. And then Lucy actually spent most of her life on a prong collar, actually, until about a year and a half ago. I transitioned her over to a martingale style. Her pearls are a martingale. We changed over just like a year and a half ago. So it's been pretty recent. And saddle up. I'm not ashamed and I don't regret having her on a prong collar.
Oh, I don't think you should.
Yeah. So that's
Explain
a big
why
one because
though.
yeah, so there's a couple things with Lucy. She's also very resilient. Also sometimes noted just subtitled as stubborn, but she has a lot of zest for life. And so she
Mm.
was undeterred by a lot of products that would help harness her pulling on leash. She just wanted to get places faster than
Mm.
what I could walk or run her. And then we did the harness for a while, but the harness rubbed her raw under her armpits at one point because we were doing a lot of running. So like running 30 to 50 miles a week together
Craziness.
back when I was very fit and stupid and had extra time to do these things.
Yep.
But
And young.
we were and young. Oh, to have that energy again. So we were running a lot and it had rubbed her raw. And I noticed that if I brought out the prong collar, she was totally fine. She was excited. She did her little twirly dance when it's time for walk. She just super excited. If I brought out the harness, she would wince, she would turn away, she would cower, she would back away
It
from
was an
me.
aversive.
And so to me, it was to me, it was worth dealing with the reprimands and the rude comments that I would get
Judgment.
from people, the judgment I would get from human beings about using a aversive collar, rather than making her feel like she had an aversive on, which was the harness. And so what's interesting to me is that had I kept forcing her to wear that harness, literally no one would have cared. Everyone would have been on board with that and said,
Yes.
that's the positive way to
From
train.
the
That's the right
visual
way.
perspective.
Yeah, yeah. But in fact, that would have been so aversive and really would have hurt our relationship if I kept
Mhm.
making her wear that. And yet, instead, I got comments like, "You're a lazy owner, you don't know how to train your dog, you're not doing enough if you still have to use a prong collar." All these comments that I was like, "You know what? It's my dog. I'm going to do what works best for me and my dog in this moment."
Did I judge you?
No.
Mm.
You didn't. And I think a lot of people who knew me would say things about prong collars, and I would gently say, "Well, Lucy actually wears a prong collar." And they go, "Oh, yeah. I mean,
Not
not for
you.
you. Not you. We know what you." And I think it's because people knew where my heart was. Like,
But
my
that's
heart
a
was with my
big
dog.
deal. That's the
Yeah.
thing. Because
Yeah.
people knew you had a great relationship with your dog.
Yeah. And I wasn't using it. I wasn't overcorrecting her with it. I wasn't yanking her around with it. That was never my intent with her. And those
Right.
tools are so easy to use incorrectly,
Yes.
um, which is where I think a lot of people get hung up on.
Yeah.
And that's wrong. It's just wrong to use those incorrectly to be abusive towards your dog. But it's
Mhm.
always wrong to be abusive towards your dog, guys.
Right,
Like,
right.
regardless of what tools you're using. Yeah,
Abuse is not a maybe just because of the
yeah,
situation. Abuse is always no.
always no, just a strong no. But it has been interesting how many dogs I find harnesses aversive. So
Mm,
I had a foster Terra who had her eyes. She had to have eye surgery before she came to me, and she had lived a majority of her life not being able to clearly see, and so she was very, very skittish about people having their hands over top of her head or things going over her head. And so to put a harness on, I just watched her flinch every single time, and I just finally told the rescue, like, I can't do it. Like, I
yeah.
can't watch this dog have such a hard time. Yeah, I told them I couldn't keep putting this harness on, and instead I transitioned her to a martingale as well, and that worked great.
Mhm.
No problems there. Which
Which
is interesting too, because I still had to put it over her head, but I think it was less things coming over top of her.
the other thing that I think is interesting, thinking about the martingale and Tara example or any dog, we can yank around a dog on a martingale. You can yank around a dog
Oh,
on
for
a
sure.
flat collar.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I was thinking this week, like, why don't we consider martingales an aversive,
Mhm.
like, normally?
Or a gentle
It's
leader or yeah.
yeah, yeah, because
But even a
they all
flat
fall into yeah, even a flat collar, yeah. And I will say, so one of the reasons I ended up going to a balance trainer with Lucy, and we'll define balance trainer here,
just
'cause
do it in your terms.
yeah, so a balance trainer is somebody who may use aversives, but also oftentimes uses rewards
Yeah,
for
hence
training.
the
So they're
balanced.
yes, so they're not doing one or the other exclusively. They're kind
Mhm.
of doing whatever works for them. So I did end up going to a balance trainer who is the one who had Lucy go on a prong collar. I will say before I had met this trainer, I I was just thinking about this week. I had forgotten about this as well. I remember going to a pet expo with my dog, with
Oh,
Lucy, and she was on a martingale. And I stopped by a training booth that like talked about like recall and 100%, like they have 100% guarantee and whatever.
mm.
And as she talked to me, I was like, oh, I won't use aversives on my dog. And I was so high and mighty about it. Like,
Aren't you?
and she was so kind. And she said, okay, she goes, I've just found personally that sometimes that leaves some gaps in training. She goes, but I think you should do whatever you feel right is by your dog, and
I
she
actually
didn't
like that
argue with me.
answer.
She probably was like, "This is a lost cause, like, get out of
Mhm.
my face. I would like to interact with someone who's going to spend money here." But she
Mhm.
was very kind about it and ushered me away. And then fast forward like 3 to 6 months later, I have Lucy on a prong collar,
Mhm.
and it was because we tried flat collar and the martingale, and she was just pulling nonstop, like to the point she'd choke herself. And we did all the training methods of like, don't let your dog keep walking. Like if they're pulled, like stop. And we literally would get 3 houses down in an hour to an hour and a half.
Whew.
And I tried that 3 separate times. They're seared in my memory, so I know it was three
That's
times.
that's rough
Um,
on everybody.
and it was terrible because Lucy couldn't get out the energy she needed to get out. I am telling you, I was frustrated. So
The
now I'm
f-
using a flat collar as an aversive because I'm yanking her and I'm
Yep.
getting more frustrated and my movements are getting short, and that's when we contacted this balance trainer, and I had been to two other reward-based training people who really their only skill was throwing cookies at the dog.
Mm.
I want to say right now, that is not the case for every positive reinforcement trainer
It's
at
also
all.
not good training. If that's the
Right.
only tool you have and you don't understand the basics of dog behavior and dog training,
Yeah.
no.
Their toolbox was very, very limited. They had a hammer. They expected Lucy to be a nail, and she was a screw. And
Yep.
so the hammer was not
I
working.
I love the way you explain that because that it's so accurate. So good training is good training. And if you don't have
Yes.
tools in your toolbox that are a variety, then
Yeah.
it's not helping.
I do think R plus or reward based training gets a bad name because there were, I think, an influx of trainers who were very excited about reward based training that flooded the market. They didn't have a lot of skills for those really tough
Mm,
dogs.
yeah.
So I found myself saying things like, "Oh, yeah, that's fine if you have a pusher. Like,
Yeah.
if you have a dog that you can just throw cookies at, that's fine. But for real dogs like mine who have actual like personalities, who have big feelings about things, that's never gonna work."
Yeah.
Oh, fast forward. Yeah.
And I think that the skill level of a reward-based trainer is a factor. But then if
Mhm.
you say that, you also have to remember that accessibility is a factor.
Yes.
So if you live in an area where there are only one trainer within an hour, which is the reality for many people, then
Yeah.
accessibility is a factor. If the only excellent trainer, I don't give a shit what their methods are, is outside of your financial resources, then you're sitting where you're sitting. So accessibility really is a factor in this whole thing as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I know of one positive reinforcement trainer in particular who is fantastic. And I believe that she is so brilliant that she could probably deal with anything and do it
Right.
in a way that is positive. She's in
Yeah.
Ohio.
Yeah.
So I just
Yeah.
wanted to say accessibility is a factor.
Yeah, and now I don't think that positive reinforcement is just simply throwing cookies. It's definitely beyond that, and there's so many good trainers
Yes.
in both camps. I'm just gonna say that. That's my opinion, is that
Mhm.
there are good trainers in both camps.
Well,
Um,
a good trainer is someone who understands dog behavior. They understand the different quadrants of punishment, reinforcement. We're going to link that. We're not going to get into the weeds on that. We will put a link for everyone because it's
and
just
that's
way too much.
weedy weeds.
But basically, good training is a huge, massive understanding of dog behavior in
Mhm.
general and understanding
Yeah.
the science behind behavior. And then it's also having all those different tools, a screwdriver, a hammer, a drill in
Mhm.
your toolbox to be able to employ and do so, in my opinion, in the least aversive way possible for each individual team.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's always been my goal with Lucy is to train with as much positive reinforcement as possible
Hmm.
and layering in things as needed if that's, a prong collar or whatever. I would say one thing that Lucy has taught me is don't judge people's tools that they're using because you don't know their whole story.
Oh
You
yeah.
don't know a lot of time you can't see handicaps obviously, or abilities,
Hmm.
obviously. I mean, we both have a friend who is all of 98 pounds and she like takes the hardest dogs out of the shelter for walks.
Hmm.
And I'm like, how? How can you handle that dog? But she's excellent.
Hmm.
And then, if you look at my dad, you would not know he had heart surgery and
Hmm.
3 back surgeries and has a handicap license plate. You just wouldn't realize that just simply looking at.
You also don't know the journey behind the dog and their person. You don't
Yeah.
know all of the history and all of the things that they've been through together. And to
Mm,
me, shouldn't positive reinforcement be about the dog and the human? I mean,
mm,
if we're going to sit there and label someone's methods and shame them for it, that doesn't feel good. And that's certainly not positive. And
mm.
so I think we need to focus more on the relationship that we build with our own personal dog and then let everybody else do whatever they're doing and allow them to make the right choices for them.
Right. And I would say if you are someone who judges other people's tools, maybe instead of judging, stop and ask. If you feel comfortable, ask those questions of, hey, can I just ask you why why is it that you use this tool with this dog? What's your journey been like? Get to know people and
Mhm.
understand why it is. I think that understanding will bring a lot of light to a
Mhm.
lot of situations. Also, if you're somebody who's using aversives and you're feeling judged, instead of becoming defensive, I would just encourage you to ask the question of, well, why do you feel that this is not an appropriate tool? And what would you do differently in this
Mhm.
situation? Because I think we can always gain knowledge from other people if we're not either accusatory or defensive
Mm.
and can actually just come to it as a conversation.
Mhm. And those conversations can build a bridge and it can actually make an opportunity for learning and it might be
Yeah,
learning on both sides.
absolutely. Yeah.
So I want to give an example of where I feel like a dog was having less quality of life with a tool that was deemed less aversive.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I have a friend who has a very large breed dog, and she was trying to walk her dog on a martingale, and it was a total fail because the dog's very fluffy and the martingale was not helpful. And so I talked to her about using a gentle leader, and she was open to it. I took the gentle leader over to her house and showed her exactly how to use it. Per majority of dogs, the dog was not, yippee, let's go for a gentle leader. You
Mhm.
generally have to do counter conditioning and get them used to it. So I showed her, how to go about doing that. And I left feeling like she was confident that she was going to be able to accomplish this and that she would be able to walk the dog, but that it was going to take them some time.
Mhm.
So it probably was a month or two that went by. And I checked in with her and said, "Hey, I was thinking about you. How is the walking going? How's the gentle leader going?"
This is a friend, not a client. So you
Yeah,
didn't
that's
leave a
what
client hanging for like a month and a half or
no,
2
this
months.
is a friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, how's it going?" And she, kind of, uh, uh, I didn't really train the gentle leader. And I was like, okay, she has a full life and everything going on. She didn't do it. I'm not here to be like, oh, you're bad. You didn't train the gentle leader. But then she told me, oh, my other friend gave me one of those dirty prong collars. I do
Yeah.
believe she used the word dirty. And she absolutely thought I was going to be like, what? And I said, oh, how's it working? And
Yeah.
she was like, oh, we've been walking her every day. And I feel like I have control and I feel good about it. And it's been working really well. And I'm also being able to train her on walks with reward and work on training while we're going on our walks as well. And I was like,
Mhm.
great, fantastic. I walked away from that interaction feeling like I had failed my friend and her dog. Not that my friend had failed her dog, because that dog went for months not getting walked because I made a decision based on me, my learning history, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't even matter. Gave her something that was going to require more than she had the time and ability to do and train. And for all that time, her dog didn't get walked. And this dog needs to be walked. She needs to be out in the world. This is exposure that she really needs. And I just sat back and I actually told Christy about it. And I was like, dang, like that was a fail. And now this dog is out in the world. She's getting trained every day on her walks. And she's a big, fluffy dog. She's not being corrected. It's literally makes the owner feel like she's in more control of the dog. Their shit goes south, and her large dog tries to pull her small body in the opposite direction. She's going to have control over that. That's it. It's just a tool. And so that's a situation where I really feel like the air quote more aversive training tool is an absolute win for that dog and owner and their relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Because what's more aversive, like having on a prong collar or not getting to
Right.
sniff and
And be in the
explore
world.
and exercise, And it might just depend on the dog. It might be
True. Absolutely.
I definitely feel like if I put a prong collar on Julius, he is strong and it crossed my mind at a moment. But I do think he would just wilt. Like,
Yep.
I think he is so sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
Lucy is not.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, double it up.
Yep.
Let's see what you do.
Can you imagine if I put a prong collar in Tater? Oh my
Oh, he'd
God.
be so sad. Yeah.
It would be terrible. And at this
Yeah.
point in my life, I wouldn't put a prong collar on Tiago. I
Yeah.
feel like that would damage our relationship. And
Right.
that's because of who the dog that he is
Mhm.
and the owner that I am. And the relationship that we have built from day one to him being 6 years old. I also feel like for him, I have the tools in the toolbox that I need to be able to
Yeah.
use a less aversive tool. In my
Yes.
friend's case,
Absolutely.
we started at the bottom. The
Yeah.
martingale was ineffective. The gentle leader was ineffective because it wasn't being used. And it was a huge project to make it usable. And technically, the gentle leader wasn't aversive to that dog, or she wouldn't have had to be counter conditioned to it, FYI. So, next step up is using the prong collar, which there is success there. They're not going to go to an e-collar. They're not going to slap something else on the dog. It's unnecessary. I just want to take the judgment out of it. And I want people to be able to do the right thing for their dog and for their
Yeah.
safety.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like I told Heather, like I wouldn't even though Lucy no longer is on a prong collar, I wouldn't let my mom hold her without a prong collar on.
Yes.
Um when we were transitioning out of the prong, we had my mom and dad and I had gone up to cut a Christmas tree and I reached in to grab something from my dad's truck and I handed the leash off to my mom and while I was digging in my dad's truck to get something and immediately felt like this is a terrible idea and reached my hand back out to grab the leash and my mom was like being pulled across the parking lot
Because Lucy was on the
almost falling
martingale.
because Lucy was on the martingale, and I told my mom, "Drop it, just drop the leash." And she did, and luckily she did not biff. It was very close though. And then I knew I could get my dog back,
Yes.
who had decided to take off in the parking lot over nothing. Like she just
She was like,
found a smell.
oh, I
She was
know I
like,
can get away with this.
"Yeah," and she does know what she can get away with different people. in different situations. And so that's who she is. And I admire that about her. I like it about her, but it also takes some planning. And so I probably just, instead of saying I would go back to a prong collar with Lucy, I would just not have my mom hold Lucy. I would tie her to the truck, or I would have my dad hold her, or I would step on the leash.
Mhm.
And those are all valid options.
More tools in your toolbox.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot more tools in my toolbox. And I really have to say, I think that is because I did get curious with training. So I
Mhm.
feel like both sides of camp say, like the R plus people say that balance trainers are just really borderline abusive or are using abusive tools, that kind of thing. Where the balance trainers will say you're just cookie pushers if you're R plus, or you would rather see a dog die than use an
Use an
aversive on a
aversive.
dog, and neither one is totally correct. And I've seen both sides of that. And
Mhm.
I've probably said some of the cookie pusher things
Mhm.
because that was my experience,
Mhm.
not because it was true, but that's what I was
'Cause you
experiencing
weren't
at the
going
moment.
to good trainers.
Right, right. And I was going to a balance trainer who was taking all these kind of R plus reject dogs and training them because the R plus trainers in the area couldn't handle these quote naughty dogs,
Mhm.
who weren't responding to cookies only. And so that's what I was seeing. I was seeing success after success with balance trainer and zero success with R plus,
Mhm.
but R plus has stuck around.
Mhm.
So it made me curious as to, I know people are not stupid enough to just keep throwing money and efforts after something that has never had
Doesn't work.
results.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so I was like, there's gotta be something to this. So on both sides, there has to be something to both sides. If
Mhm.
both training methods are still around, they're working for people for
Mhm.
one reason or another. And that's what made me curious about behavior and really expanded my training knowledge because I started listening to reward-based trainers, positive reinforcement trainers, because I wanted to see what they had that maybe I missed out on with
Mm.
the reward-based trainers that I had personally used.
Mhm.
So I would say get curious, like why is this working for someone, whichever side you're on? Why is the other side working for someone?
Mhm.
And get curious about some of those trainings.
Mhm. And I think that the cookie pushing stuff, I understand why people say that, but I actually think that I don't really love the labels. I really don't. I really would love to ditch all of the labels in general. One of our, favorites, Sarah Stremming, had a podcast where they were talking about this, and she said, "I just am a dog behavior consultant at this point." And
Mm.
she's like, "I don't want to be positive reinforcement. I don't want to be balanced. I don't want to be this. I don't want to be that. I just want to be a person who works on dog behavior." And man, that resonated with me so freaking much because I want to start with at the most positive, least aversive, however you want to say it,
Yeah.
method. But if that's not working, then I don't think that that's success. So, for example, I had a client puppy. Now, this was a client, and she was a very large puppy, and she was also an extremely fearful puppy. And that's just the luck of the draw in the genetic bucket that she drew.
Yeah.
And the owners they really want to be able to walk their dogs. That's something that's really important to them. So when I was working with them, they said, "We just want to be able to walk her and her be comfortable walking." And I was like, "Okay, well, let's see what we're working with here." I started out by walking her with my dogs in tandem to give her some confidence and just see how she responded to that. And it worked really nicely. But if I took her on her own, she would absolutely stop and freeze. And
Mhm.
at 16 weeks, she was 43 pounds. This is a large, this is going to be a large dog.
Yeah.
Picking her up and carrying her home, even at 43 pounds, is not a great option.
No.
And it was things she would hear, it was things she would see, it could be in the
Mhm.
distance. There were all sorts of triggers. And it wasn't something that in a neighborhood walk you can just plan for.
Right.
She would take food only sometimes. it wasn't a great option because she would freeze and try to back out. So you're trying to
Mhm.
give food to a dog who's backing away, right?
Sure.
So there are a whole bunch of methods of things that you can do with an extremely long training plan and all of these different situations and scenarios. However, what I found was since she had a really nice, well-fitted martingale on that was a little bit different style, it had a little chain portion. It kept really snug on her neck. It wasn't choking her. It was just snug so she couldn't back out for safety because that was a risk. I found that the first time that she froze, I literally had to pick her up and I started moving in a jog and put her down and just changed the momentum. And she came out of it and started walking again. So
Yeah.
I thought, huh, I wonder if a change in momentum when she does this could break her out of this flight frozen state and just get her moving. Because
Mhm.
any dog sitting in that state, they're not having fun. It's a terrible
Right.
place to be. It's from fear. It's horrible. So I decided to experiment. And the next time she did it, I did a little oppositional pressure on the leash and I started moving at a jog. And boom, I mean, within a second, she was moving with me and I slowed down to a normal walk and she was totally fine. And I used this method several times on that walk. By the time that I had her final training session, I had her owners come on a walk with us and I showed them how to do exactly what I was doing. And the wife was walking her, and this kid on a bike rode right in front of them. And she kept walking. She didn't even freeze. The woman was shocked. And she said,
Mhm.
I can't believe that she didn't do anything. And I said, well, what would she have done before? She's like, oh, I would have been carrying her home. She would have been pancaked. There's nothing I could have done to get her moving. And she wasn't even fazed by it. So a lot of people would give me shit for doing that. And I stand behind it. And was
Yeah.
it in my mind, it was actually the most positive thing I could do for that dog because a long, drawn out training plan was not going to happen. And
Right.
this got that dog immediately out of that state of mind, allowed her owners to walk her, and away we go. But I
Yeah.
would be maligned in a lot of communities if I said, "Hey, this is what I did."
Yeah. I think as you were saying that, it seems unreasonable to ask people to have a 6-month training plan
Yep.
for something like going on a walk. I'm not saying that it shouldn't ever be done, but I'm just saying for some simple things, I think positive reinforcement is it obviously works. But I think there are some times where you add a little pressure one way or another and we can break a dog from their fear or from just like you were saying. And I how aversive is being stuck in their mind
Mhm.
and being so terrified that they can't even move their body.
Yes.
And I feel like of those two options, oppositional pressure is
Mhm.
definitely the least aversive of those two.
I would agree.
And I know there's some debate on that, but that would be my opinion. Like when we look at these options, we definitely want to look at what's best for the dog
Mhm.
and like how that's gonna affect them, you
And
know?
and a long training plan to counter condition her and I mean, I guess it's fair to say I don't know how fast she would have progressed through that
Mm.
whole training plan, but it takes a large amount of commitment on the
Mhm.
owner's part and then also, be able to work through whatever the dog might however the dog might respond. That also brings me back to the resource situation, and that's not just financial, it's time. And
Mhm.
if something really simple can get that dog moving and it's just a little oppositional leash pressure, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
stand I stand by my decision. So,
Yeah. Absolutely. I will say clearly positive reinforcement works because we accidentally train our dogs to do so many things
so true.
that they have a positive association with. Like, you grab the leashes and everybody in the house is like
Mhm.
You have to spell out the word walk because everyone knows that,
Mhm. And then they learn
Um,
that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, in fact, one of the more humorous positive reinforcements that Lucy learned was she checks beards for snippets. So when she was younger, we lived with my brother and he sometimes dropped when in his beard, dropped food in
It
his beard as he
happens.
was eating, and if he didn't realize it and like wipe it out right away, Lucy would like wander over and find some snacks. And I had to explain to this this guy at the gym. He
Oh
was
my
like, "Oh, what's
gosh.
she
She did it
doing?"
to a stranger?
Yeah, to a stranger. So he goes, "Don't worry, I'm really great with dogs." I was like, Here's the deal. She's not mean, but she might make you feel bad because she'll pretend to be your friend and then she won't be your friend, and it makes people
Mhm.
feel bad." And he goes, "Oh, well, let me try." And so he kneels down and she runs over to him and she gets wiggly, and then she like gets up in his beard.
Oh
And
my
he goes,
god.
"Oh, she loves me. What's she doing?" And I was like, "She's checking for treats." And he was like, "I'm sorry, what?" And I was like, "She's checking for treats. She wants to see if you dropped any food in your beard." He's like, "That is amazing." Like,
So
that
funny.
is not something I would ever train. It's not
No,
something I intended to train. It
it's
just
cute though.
happened. Yeah, it is hilarious.
But you're right. Clearly, we reinforce things that we don't even try and reinforce,
Yeah,
or just happen to the environment reinforces them for us.
yeah.
So obviously, reinforcement-based training is
Stands
successful.
on its own.
We're
Yeah,
totally not saying that it's crap in any way, shape, or form. It's the
no,
primary type of training that I do. I just it goes back to us talking about using the right method for you and your dog and the relationship that you have with your dog.
yeah. Supporting the relationship you want to have with your dog as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about choosing a professional, we already talked about in another episode how when if you're getting another dog or you're getting a new dog, you're getting a puppy, one of the things you want to be thinking about is who choosing a training professional. So when you're looking to choose a training professional, the first thing that we would say is to ask friends who have a great relationship with their dog. So if you see a friend who has an awesome relationship that is the type of relationship you would like to model or like to build, I would say, "Hey, who did you go to and who did you go to for a dog trainer or what trainers do you follow or whatever it might be and
Yeah.
get some advice on that. I wouldn't just necessarily ask people who you see that look amazing on social media because, well,
Oh no.
this
Social
is
media is
real
a lie.
life.
Yeah.
This is real life, people. And then if you can make a small list of people who sound great, I would encourage you to contact that trainer, ask to go and watch a class, ask if you can talk to them, see what their relationship looks like with their personal dog, if at all possible. It would be amazing if you could see them training with their personal dog. And a lot of times, if you go to watch a class, the trainer is using their personal dog as a demo dog. So that can give you a lot of information. And then I would also say trust your gut and make sure you're comfortable with their methods. If something about their methods makes you feel wrong or makes you feel icky, I would say
Yeah.
that's probably not the right trainer for you and you need to keep
Yeah.
looking.
Yeah. Probably the labels in that
Yeah, yeah.
are less important in that the labels are so loose anymore that they really don't give you an insight on who the trainer
Mhm.
is or what they're doing. Until I met Heather, I didn't realize that we could go and sit in on a class and watch.
Yeah.
I was like, well, isn't that like getting secret information from this person or something? And Heather's like, no, I would never go to a trainer without first watching
Mhm.
them. I was like, what? You can watch them? And that's how we ended up agreeing that one of the trainers would work for what we wanted to do. Yeah, so I would say definitely go and watch and make sure it's a good fit for you and your dog.
Mhm.
And then also really work on being comfortable in saying no. And
Mm.
I this is a hard one for me
Yes.
personally. It's I always say like, well, advocate for your dog. How hard is that? But when it comes
It's
down to
it's
it,
literally on my little outline. So I love
okay,
this.
yeah.
Yes.
On when it comes down to it, I was raised in a family that you respect your elders and you respect
Yes.
leadership, and that is hard ingrained in me. So I always think like, well, I'm paying this person and they're the expert, and
They're
so
the
it's hard to say
professional.
no. Yeah, they're the professional, and I've had to say no to a lot of trainers, like many more than I ever thought I
Mm.
would need to. And ironically, the balance trainer I use, I just went on a group walk with her recently, and I just come blowing in like, "Hey, I need an extra leash, and here's what I'm going to be doing. I know you're doing this, but I'm doing this, and then we'll see if it matches up. And then if not, I'll just leave and don't worry about me."
Mhm.
And like all her people are like, "What is happening?" I was like a tornado coming in, and then I was like, "Sorry, we have a great relationship. I've been with her for like worked with her off and on for 3 years. We're fine. Sorry, everybody. Like, I'm just doing my own thing." And she was like, "Yeah, of course, do your own thing, girl." Like,
Oh.
but I don't think I have not felt that comfortable with many of the other trainers
Mhm.
where I've had to physically step in front of my dog to block trainers
Mhm.
from doing things, or told them I'm not comfortable
I'm
with you
not
taking
willing
my
to
dog.
do that.
Please don't.
Mhm.
Please don't take my dog. Please don't work with my dog, or we're not doing that at this
Mhm.
time. Yeah, I've had to body block trainers, which is mind blowing to me.
Mhm. Well, and I think when we say don't focus on the labels,
Mm,
that comes from a space of don't assume that a positive reinforcement labeled trainer is,
yes.
well, one, totally positive reinforcement, because that's not true. And not in every case, but I have been to classes where people label themselves as positive reinforcement and they are not. They are
Right.
balanced. But I am educated on the difference. So it is very clear to me. So then I feel like it's a marketing ploy.
Mhm.
But don't assume that because you're going to someone who is positive reinforcement that they are excellent, because
Right.
that's a problem. So I want you to really focus on, here's a little list of people, go see a class. Yes, it's an investment in time, but it will save you so much in the long run if you are with someone who you feel good about and is clearly educated and is having a great relationship with your dog, with the humans in the class. The whole
Mhm.
thing feels good to you, then you're in a better place to learn as well. And
Yeah.
so I think that you just need to make sure that you're choosing the right fit for you. And that's why I like to say, the labels, I don't know. It's not necessarily the end all be all.
Yeah. And if you are thinking, well, okay, I could go, but I really don't know what I'm looking for.
Mm,
I could go and evaluate, but I don't know what I would be looking for necessarily. Maybe ask one of your friends who's
yes.
more in it if they would be willing to spend, a Wednesday night the training class with
Yeah.
you.
Take them out for a
Yeah,
coffee beforehand, like
yeah,
hang
yeah,
out, whatever. Just ask
yeah,
them, because Christy and I went together after I taught her that you could do that. We
yeah.
went together that night, and honestly, a trainer should want to talk to you. They should be passionate about what they're doing. They should want you to join their class.
Mhm.
So if I walk into a training facility and the person seems like they don't even want me there, it's not my trainer. I'm out. Really make sure that it feels good to you.
Yeah. And I will say Heather's been great because there's been some trainers where they send out an email and I'm like, well, I'm not going to this class. Look how rude they were. And Heather's like, actually, so these are some things like in the dog show world that would be more common,
Yeah,
maybe not so much the pet parent
different
world.
perspective.
Yeah, different perspective. So maybe also run things by and try it out.
Mhm,
It ended up that that trainer I was not going to go to because of her email. Lucy and I love that class. Like
mhm,
we enjoyed that class so much.
mhm. And I actually ended up going to that class as well because I really thought that it was great. So there you go.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I want to say about labels in general is adding labels to training methods and wielding them like a weapon adds
Mm,
unnecessary pressure and shame to the entire thing.
mhm,
And it's just not kind. Training is supposed to be fun. People who are training their dogs, well, everyone loves their dogs, I hope. But people
yeah,
who are training their dogs are really invested in their dogs. And
mhm,
so, regardless of their methods, they are putting in time and investing time into their relationship So I just hate thinking about training in a negative light and using that as a way to malign someone or as a weapon. I just would encourage people to go train their own dog.
I would encourage everyone to be open to being kind
Yes, that's
in
much
their
better.
judgments.
Yeah.
Yeah, showing some kindness in the judgments and having a comprehension that you don't know the other person's journey.
hmm And
Yeah.
be curious about not just your training journey, but theirs too, because it
Yeah.
might open a conversation you didn't expect and you really might learn something.
Yeah.
And that's
Wow.
fantastic.
Yeah. And I think when we open those lines of communication, it keeps us humble as well.
That's very true.
Yeah.
It really is. We're all just in it for our dogs.
Yeah. Yeah. And just because you've grown in your training doesn't not everybody's on the same path or
Mm,
speed of learning that you are. Let's just meet people where they are.
mm. Yeah, we say meet the dog where they are, meet the people where they are
Yeah.
too, and understand that their journey is going to grow just like yours has.
Yeah.
Hmm. I think we
Yeah.
ventured into the deep waters and we did not drown.
I
I
hope
su-
none of our listeners drowned.
we do ask that you share and rate our podcast so that more people can find us. We really enjoy you listening to us just bat this stuff around and maybe take a little food for thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have some opinions that you want to share with us, follow us over on Instagram.
At sometimes there's side eye.
Oh yeah, just Instagram. Just get on no, sometimes there's side eye on Instagram.
I
So,
rely on you to remember what it is. Like it's that hard
but I like that you always have to remind me to say what it is.
to say the actual handle.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for your time. We will be back 2 weeks on Thursday and have a great day.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.